and I am making sourdough bread, and Melee thinks it's time to be fed, but it's not. So this is a little more than a half cup of my sourdough starter, and I have some lukewarm water right here. It is 13 ounces of lukewarm water, a little more than a half a cup of my sourdough starter, and I'm going to put that into the water. So I'm going to make 2 loaves. So I'm going to do this twice, but I'm going to do it with 2 different types of flour. So that's what a little more than a half a cup of sourdough starter looks like in 13 ounces of lukewarm water. And what I do with that is I take a fork and I basically squish it up against the sides, and that's it. And then I cut it up a little bit and I let it sit there. And now I'm just going to let the water kind of soften that up and do a trick. And see how it turns nice and milky? Looks like I'm making milk. So I'm going to set that aside for a second. I'm going to take my cup measure, and in this case I'm going to use the artesian bread flour from Red Hill, Bob's Red Mill. And I'm going to take 4 cups of flour. So just loosely, 1, 2, 3, and let's get a nice, not quite getting a full scoop. Took me 3 tries. There we go. And there's 4. So now I'm going to use my teaspoon measure to measure in 2 teaspoons of salt. My problem is here that I actually used up the last little bit of my sea salt. There isn't 2 teaspoons in here. Let's see how much we got. Okay, apparently nothing. So I have no salt. This is empty. So what I'm going to do is I have some Hawaiian salt. This is that pink Hawaiian salt that I brought back from Kauai a couple years ago. It's called Alaia sea salt. And I want to use 2 teaspoons of it, but this is a very coarse salt. So there's a teaspoon of it. And you can see how coarse it is. So I'm actually going to grind this. And since I don't have a mortar and pestle here, I'm going to take a little teacup. I'm going to put 2 teaspoons. So there's 1 teaspoon and there's 2 teaspoons. And you see how coarse it is. I know this isn't the greatest camera. I'm working on that. But now I have to grind this up a little bit because I need some fine salt. So since I don't have my mortar and pestle here, I'm just going to take a tablespoon and I'm going to grind it up in this cup. Get it a little finer. Okay, so I'm going to move this out of the way. You know, I do have a mortar, what is it called? A muddler. So this is what you use for making mojitos. you muddle your mint with this. But I'm going to use the other end. Just going to kind of grind this up a little bit. I want my salt a little finer than what I've got here. I want it to blend in a little bit more evenly distributed into my flour. I'm just making do with what I got. Take a break from that, and here's our starter. You can see it's softened up quite a bit. You can almost stir it with the fork. So I'm mashing it against the side a little bit. It's got some good natural yeast action going on here. So I'm going to blame this on this product right here. It's this Hornitos Añejo, and I've had about 3 shots of this before I started. And Grandchild was successful with her cooking programs, and she drank a lot of wine while she was entertaining us with her culinary skills. Hoping some of that rubbed off on me. What's the Galloping Gourmet's name? Something Graham. Lisa? Graham what? Graham Campbell. That doesn't sound right. Could be, though. He was a Canadian. Now look at this. It's just all milky. There's a little bit left in there. So I'm going to go ahead and grind up this Hawaiian sea salt a little bit more. Just want it a little finer so it is more evenly distributed throughout my flour. I do have a mortar and pestle at my other house, but that's not going to help me right now. So, okay. So we need to add some sea salt to our list. That's going to work. I'll take this, sprinkle it in there. And then normally I just use the teaspoon measure, but since I have this tablespoon measurement, do this. Hope you're enjoying this. All 2 of my viewers, 1 of my viewers. Okay, so the salt's evenly distributed. Graham Kerr. That was his name, Kerr. Kerr. He was a fantastic entertainer. The Galloping Gourmet. I believe he was in Toronto, but I may be mistaken. He was definitely in Canada. Okay, so I'm not even going to bother to clean this out real well because I'm going to make another loaf in just a moment. And again, this is the Red Hill, Bob's Red Hill. Red Mill, unbleached, enriched artesian bread flour. So this is going to be our first loaf. So I just used the fork and I blend it in, and I'm trying not to make a mess of the bowl. That's why I've got the flour on the sides. I may add a little water to this. I will definitely add some water to this and hydrate it a little bit further. With this recipe, we're at about 75-76% hydration. But when I wet my hand to stretch and fold this dough, it adds a little bit more. And I'm aiming for between 75% and 85% hydration. Now these 2 loaves that I'm making tonight are going to head to even further Northern California with my daughter and my granddaughter. So I'm going to bake these tomorrow morning, and I'm going to send these loaves north. So I'm going to take a break from this for a second and let this incorporate a little bit on its own. Sometimes you don't need to do anything to get work done. You just need to let the work do itself. So you can see a little bit sticking to me here. I'm gonna roll that off, stick it into the bowl. So the last loaf I made, and I already put it up on Facebook, this was pretty close to 80% hydration. And there's a couple pumpkin seeds on it and a little bit of brown rice flour. Really good breaks in it. This is going home with her for sure. Extra sour. This sat out for 2 days. The sourdough starter sat out for 2 days. This has got a really rich sour taste to it. This has only been sitting out since last night, so it's not quite as sour, but it is being made with the mother before it was fed. Okay, so you can see I'm trying to get the rest of this flour to incorporate into this. And I have a bowl already prepared that has been sprayed with a little bit of olive oil. So I'm going to try to get the rest of this flour into here. So I just keep stretching and folding it. This is called a no-knead recipe, but you just stretch and fold. So when I press on this, you can see it starts getting sticky. And I just take it and flip over the sticky and back into the flour. And I'm slowly incorporating more and more of the flour into this. In the next 2 stretch and folds, I'll be wetting my hand and adding a little more water every time I stretch and fold. Look at that. So simple to do. I don't know why people make it so complicated. They want you to weigh stuff and use a scale and all that. Not all that important. Maybe if you're trying to sell a product and you want super consistency. So I'm just rolling this over, adding more flour to it. Okay, so now I'm going to take all this flour, scoop it up, and just press it in. Scoop it up, press it in there. Stretch and fold, stretch and fold. You can see it's sticking to me a little bit. Just take it, fold it in. Just incorporate all that flour in with that sourdough starter and the little bit of lukewarm water I've added. So it's nice and sticky. One more stretch and fold. And now I'm going to take this. So I wash my hands really well. I actually trim my nails to make sure that I've limited the amount of bacteria I'm adding from myself into this. So this is mostly just what's existing here in Walnut Creek in my kitchen. Okay, so we're going to take this now. There's very little flour left. A little bit. A couple tablespoons of flour left. And I'm going to take this and throw it in my bowl. So this bowl has been sprayed with olive oil so it won't stick. And there you go. That's it. Now I'm going to stretch and fold this 2 more times within the next 15 minutes. Sorry, I'm not commenting on your question. Are you making sourdough for your soul? Oh, wow. That's harsh, dude. I can't believe that comment. So I'm actually making it for my daughter and my granddaughter. Okay? And they're going to take it up north, up to even farther northern California. So I'm going to stretch and fold this 2 more times in the next 15 minutes, and then it's going to proof overnight, and I will bake it tomorrow morning. So we're going to do the same thing. So there's just, you can see there's only a couple tablespoons of flour left in here, but I'm not going to use the same flour. This time I'm actually going to use this flour, which is Safeway's signature brand, unbleached, all-purpose flour. It's pre-sifted whole wheat flour. So I'm going to measure out again 4 cups of that. But what I do first last time, I started off with a little more than a half a cup of my sourdough starter from my mother. So that's a little more than a half a cup. And that's because I'm counting on there being some air bubbles in there. And I'm not trying to kill all those air bubbles. There's no point in doing all that. It's close to a half a cup. So I'm going to get some lukewarm water. I'm going to fill up this container with 13 ounces of lukewarm. And this is straight out of the tap. I'm not using spring water. I'm not using anything special. I actually have really good local water here. So I don't know if you can see that on the measurement on the side, but it's about 13 ounces. Take that half cup of sourdough starter. If I had sprayed this with olive oil, it would have come out of here a lot better, a lot smoother. Look how sticky that stuff is. It's all sticky and bubbly. Okay, so done with the half cup measure. Now again, I'm just going to take this and use the fork. Just let that start melting, falling apart. It's actually a little cold. I'd rather have cold water than hot water. Cold water is not going to activate the yeast as much. Hot water can kill the natural wild yeasts. So in this case, I'm okay that it's not as warm as it was the last batch. So this last little bit here of sourdough starter, this is my mother. This is my discard. I could either throw this in the compost pile, but this is actually just about the perfect amount to make some pumpkin bread. So I'm going to make some sourdough pumpkin bread. And it's amazingly sweet. You really don't taste the sour in it. But the natural yeast that's in this is going to give my pumpkin nut bread a really good rise. So I'm going to save this. That's not going to be part of this stream right now, but this will be part of tomorrow morning's bake. Okay, so while I'm letting this kind of melt and start brewing, fermenting, I'm going to go ahead and take 4 cups of this. And again, this is just Safeway's unbleached all-purpose flour. It's not bread flour. It is pre-sifted, but it's nothing special. So I'm going to take 4 cups of this. You can see I got a couple tablespoons left of the other stuff. I'm not going to affect it whatsoever. There's 1. That's a little less than 1. Now we're a little less than 3. And we're a little less than 4. So I actually have room to add a little more flour if I need to. And now I have to go back to making my salt, because my salt is not quite fine enough. I'm going to wash all this garbage off my hands, and I'm going to put 2 teaspoons of that wonderful Hawaiian salt in there, and I'm going to start muddling it or crushing it to make it more fine. So right there. Take 2 teaspoons of this. There's 1. As you can see, I'm desperately low. So if you'd like to subscribe to my channel, probably one of you or 2 of you subscribing to my channel would be enough to afford another bag of this. Look at that, I got less than a teaspoon left. Simple sellout. And I'm going to use my muddler like a mortar and pestle. I just want to crush this up a little bit. I want it to be more incorporated into my flour than something you would have around your margarita glass on the edge. I don't want big chunks and flakes. It's wonderful if you're cooking with this, you know, like if I was making some pork dish in the crock pot, this would be fine. But because I want it in bread, I actually want it to be a finer, more distributed salt. Okay, one more time. That's pretty fine. That's gonna work. So there's my flour, my 4 cups of flour. And I'm just going to take this tablespoon that I have right here and incorporate that in. Okay, so I spread it up nice and high on the sides. Get a nice hole in the center. And take my milky solution and I'm going to go ahead and stir it up again. And this is my sourdough mother in some water. I kind of whip it up a little bit. Pretty much no way you can harm this. This is nice wild yeast that's fermenting. I'm going to pour it right into the flour. Okay, look at that. See how I got a little bit more left in there? Take that. Okay, and we're done with that. All this can go in the sink. All that gets cleaned up. Now all I got to do is incorporate this flour nice and slow. So I'm making 2 different loaves for my daughter and my granddaughter to take back up to Red Bluff, California. And notice that I'm trying to keep it in the center. So I use the flour basically as a buffer from the stainless steel. You do not want to make sourdough in a reactive vessel. And so what I've done is I'm buffering it the whole time. Look at that. See how it stays right in the center? So it's really never touching the metal. None of my sourdough is actually touching the metal. And by the time it does touch the metal, I pull it out of here and I throw it in my glass bowl, which is non-reactive. And it's been sprayed with olive oil. So this will rise overnight. So I'm going to leave this sit in the bowl after I stretch and pull it, stretch and fold it 2 more times over the next 15 to 30 minutes. And then I'll just let it proof overnight in the natural environment of this kitchen, which is relatively close to San Francisco, California. I don't live in San Francisco, but my bacteria in my kitchen is not far off from the bacteria in the kitchens of some of the best sourdough bread in the world. Okay, so now, remember that container that I used to this little Pyrex container that I use to keep my sourdough starter going in? I'm going to use my hand, just dip it in it, wet my hand in it. I'm going to stretch and pull and roll it over and incorporate the rest of this flour into it. And the reason why I wet my hand is so that it doesn't stick to my hand as much as it's doing right here. The next 2 stretch and pulls over the next 15 to 30 minutes will be much cleaner operations. So you can see there's only maybe a 1/4 cup of flour left in the bottom of that bowl. Look at that. So I'm going to grab that, just kind of press it into it. It's really not that difficult. It's a pretty simple process. Just stretching and folding, stretching and folding, and incorporating all that flour into it. Now remember, I had a couple tablespoons left of flour from the last batch. This time I'm going to try to get even less. You know, it's funny, the kid that I'm making this for actually has a Twitch account, and she's not even on here watching it. How sad is that? Doesn't matter, I'm going to send this to YouTube just to show how simple this whole process is. That a drunk 56-year-old man can make sourdough bread simply by playing with flour and water. Okay, so that's real good. There's hardly anything left in the bottom of that pan. Look at that when I lift it up. There's maybe a tablespoon, a little more than a tablespoon of flour. It's incorporated in there. Okay, so I'm going to grab my other bowl, which has already been pre-olive oiled, and pop this into it. So this is a non-reactive Pyrex bowl. I'm going to take this nice sticky ball of sourdough flour and drop it into that bowl. Okay, now this one, sweep the rest of it out of it. That can go in the sink, get cleaned up. So now, you see this one's a little bit dry in the center, but super sticky on the edges. Dip my hand in this water here and stretch and pull. Just stretch and pull with a wet hand. So wet hand, stretch and pull. So this is where I start rising above the 75% hydration level. I was at 75% by my calculations of my flour and my sourdough starter and the water I used. And every time I dip my hand in that water and stretch and pull this, I'm making it a little more hydrated. Okay, so I'm going to set this one aside. This one's going to sit for like about 15 minutes and allow it to incorporate. And the other one that I already started has been sitting for at least 5 minutes. We're getting close to the 15-minute mark. So I'll just let you look at this is what I dip my hand in. I'm actually going to go ahead and wash all this off my hands. And you'll see that when I dip my hand in this and stretch and pull the next time, I won't end up with all this. A lot of people with YouTube channels will try selling you a scraper. You can use a fork as a scraper if you want to. You can use a scraper to scrape your bowl. I'm not trying to sell anything. I'm just trying to teach people that it's super simple to do this. There's nothing to this. You don't need a lot of education. You don't need a lot of time or money. It's a pretty simple process. So I'm going to take a couple seconds to wash my hands, and then I'm going to start stretching and pulling the first loaf I started to make. It's possible that the kiddies want to be fed. It is now 15 minutes to 6. The kiddies normally get fed at 6 o'clock a.m. and 6 o'clock p.m. So I might take the camera and show you that there is a kitten, I'm going to say a 4-year-old kitten, that is walking around the kitchen, rubbing and bumping everything in the kitchen because she thinks it's time for dinner. Because technically she's correct. It is time for dinner. So this is Melee. There she is. That's Melee. And see, she's going to bump and rub everything in the kitchen. Okay? This is the recyclable bag, and it's over kiltered. Is it dinner time, Melee? Melee? Time for dinner? Dinner time? All right. Let's go back to stretching and folding. So I'm just going to do one of these, and then I'm going to go ahead and end the stream. This is the first loaf I started. It's close to 15 minutes since I started it. And as you can see, it's still got a little bit of dryness to it. Watch this. Look how clean my hands are now. I washed them all off. There's a little bit stuck to the back of my hands, no big deal. I'm going to just dip my hand in water, and I'm going to stretch and fold. Grab this, stretch, and fold. And every time I do that, I'm incorporating a little bit more of that dry flour into it, and I'm adding a little bit of water to it. So I can do a couple stretches and folds, then dip my hand again, stretch, and fold. So I'm going to do the same thing to the other one, and I'm going to do it another time in 15 more minutes to each one of these. And then I'm going to take a damp, just the opposite of dry, a damp kitchen towel, and I am going to let it sit out overnight and proof. And then possibly tomorrow morning, I will show the process of how I stretch and fold one more time before proofing for an hour in the refrigerator while I heat up my Dutch ovens in the oven. And we will bake this tomorrow morning. Now I'm going to try to do something fancy with one of these, but I'm not going to do it with both of them. Now you can still see there's a little bit of dry chunks of flour. See that? See that pocket open up? See that flour there? Take a little water, press it on there. Again, I'm trying to get up to as much as 85% hydration. So every time I dip my hand in there, I'm adding a teaspoon or maybe a little less than a teaspoon of water. Look at that. Look how it's becoming all gummy now. Every time I do this, a little less flour, a little less dry chunks in it. And that olive oil spray that I use on the side of the pan makes it so easy to work with. Watch this. Take both my hands, wet this one, look at that, form it into a nice ball. Okay, so I am going to stretch and fold this one more time, but this is exactly the sort of a look I'm looking for, exactly the sort of consistency I'm looking for. I'm up to at least 78%, maybe 80% hydration right now on this. I'm not getting any more dry chunks showing up. You don't see any bubbles breaking through. Perfect. So I'm still going to do that one more time. Let's see. It hasn't been quite 15 minutes since this first one, but look. See how that's got some dry, chunky parts in it? Watch this. I'm going to do the same thing. Just wet my hands. In fact, this one here, I'm going to do a couple stretches and pulls. Stretch, fold, stretch, fold. Okay, that's it. I'm just going to do that little bit. See how easy this is? There's nothing to it. It's not rocket science. Just a little baking. Just a little playing with flour and water. Something we all did as kids. Okay, now I'm going to do the same thing. Just kind of make a ball out of it. Just keep rolling it around. Stretch and fold, stretch and fold. Look at that. Oh, see? Little dry pocket right there. Perfect. You can see that. Little dry pocket. That's what I'm trying to get rid of. Okay, wet my hands a little bit. So I'm going to do this one more time. 15 minutes from now, then I'm going to cover it up and let it rise overnight, let it proof overnight. So that's pretty much it for now. Got a little sticky there at the end. So I'm going to wash this. I'm going to wash everything up. Clean the kitchen up so Ms. Ryder is not too angry with me for making all this big mess and invading her privacy. And wish I had a shot, but my shot glass is empty and my hands are too sticky to grab the bottle out of the freezer. So that's it for now. Hope you enjoyed this short video. Hope you're having fun with your sourdough bread. Hope you're having a great weekend. For now, Ryder out. Okay, it's not giving me the option to end the stream.